Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. Quite a bit to get through, but let's start with a run through the markets here for you. So, a lot of red ink over here in the north, in the south and in the east as well, but it's the east that's our focus. Kenyan legislators still dead set on keeping a credit-killing rate cap in place, regardless of the collapse in lending to the private sector we've seen over the last 2 and a bit years. Debate in a bill to essentially refine the rate cap continued today, but bank stocks don't seem to be especially responsive. Look at the top two banks in the country. Equity Bank unchanged today, year-to-date gains over 8% there. KTB closed almost 4% higher. You're looking at year-to-date gains there of 4.5%. Here's what's coming up tonight. A dispute with the Ugandan government freezes oil and gas projects in the country. We'll explore why. Saudi Arabia is displaying what it says is evidence of the attack of its oil facilities last weekend. And Rwanda has its eyes set on China's chili industry. Right then, quite a bit to get through tonight, but let's start in Uganda. As you might recall, a couple of years back, it found a fair bit of oil on its territory, but now its oil and gas project preparations have stalled after companies operating in the country pulled back from their activities in the wake of disagreements on their investment. Now, this dispute is threatening Uganda's hopes of becoming a major oil and gas supplier. CGTN's Michael Baleke starts us off tonight.
It's more than a decade since Uganda discovered oil in the western part of the country bordering DR Congo. But preparations to take the oil out of the ground and onto the market have hit another obstacle.
The net impact of this is that it is going to be very difficult to encourage or to entice more Ugandans to join oil and gas because of the uncertainty. And of course, there are the obvious things like the cost of money people have borrowed to buy equipment, to be ready. And all of a sudden, bleak.
French oil company Total E&P Uganda recently suspended all its activities following the collapse of a deal to buy a stake in British oil company Tullow. China's national offshore oil company CNOOC is also part of the transaction.
The companies cannot go away forever because they have a resource that they have found, a resource that they have already booked in their reserves, in their stock exchange. So what is required is for us to get back to the table and engage, and meaningfully engage and move forward.
China National Offshore Oil Corporation, CNOOC, Total and Tullow have jointly discovered an estimated 6.5 billion barrels of crude, 1.4 billion of which are recoverable. The latest disagreements on investments in Uganda's oil and gas are likely to further delay timelines for oil production earlier scheduled for 2022. But the government is hopeful that a final investment decision will be reached before the end of the year. The current standoff also stems from disagreements over Uganda's tax laws.
These are laws that bring value to the country. These are laws that have been benchmarked on international practices. What is really at stake is what is the value? And asking for tax for this country is value that is required. And I think that cannot be changed over a transaction like this.
The government now says it will convene a meeting in the coming days to discuss the status of the final investment decision. This is expected to unlock funds for projects like the oil pipeline, the central processing facility, and the refinery required ahead of production. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
On to monetary policy now. South Africa's Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee has started its meeting to discuss rates. Now, it's not clear at this point in time whether the bank will actually cut the repo rate, as was widely anticipated, in light of the weak economic performance and relatively low inflation. In fact, inflation dropped about 4% in July, rose slightly again in the month of August. But these are at levels that the Reserve Bank prefers for easing all the same. But in August, the Consumer Price Index has shown that food inflation is at its highest level since 2017. Here's CGTN's Sumitra Naidu with the data.
August inflation came in at 4.3% from 4% in July. Food inflation pushed to an 18-month high and could be on an upward trend as oil prices remain volatile. Analysts believe the MPC will err on the side of caution and keep rates unchanged.
The consensus is for a no cut in interest rates, given where the economy is and given the social unrest you're seeing. For me, economically, those are signs that people are economically disenfranchised, and there's a possibility that maybe the Reserve Bank might actually act contrary to what the market is looking for and actually cut interest rates by 25 basis points.
I think the SAB is likely to wait to see what the US Fed does, but also to see some normalization in oil markets, and also to see what will be the impact of the medium-term budget policy statement in October. Potentially, they may cut in November, but 25 basis points, because remember, we're an emerging market country that still requires portfolio inflows. And as a result, our interest rates in real terms need to be relatively comparable with other emerging markets.
The economy grew 3.1% in the second quarter of this year, albeit off a low base, a contraction of the same amount in the first quarter. The finance minister launched a new plan to get the country back on track, and Moody's suggested they won't be downgrading South Africa to junk just yet. Still, it may not be enough to sway the Reserve Bank.
The Reserve Bank looks at forward inflation, what is expected over the next 18 months, and a rebound that we saw in the second quarter, it's unlikely to be sustainable, given that the global environment is slowing down. You look at business confidence, it tumbled to 21, which means almost 80% of business executives don't feel positive about prevailing business conditions. And in such an environment, you are unlikely to see a robust growth in fixed investment by the private sector, which ultimately is the biggest driver of economic growth.
The Reserve Bank last cut rates in July, taking the prime lending rate to 10%. Even though there is room for another rate cut, there are too many uncertainties, issues that could quickly escalate and push inflation higher, an area that the Reserve Bank doesn't want to be in. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Right then, I'll run through some company headlines now. So South African Airways is our starting point. It says a cash injection from the state of $376 million approved for the 2019-2020 fiscal year is expected at the end of the month. The state-owned flag carrier's long-term turnaround strategy is based on an equity injection, though, of a hell of a lot more, $1.5 billion. That said, the government wants further cost reductions before it commits more taxpayer money. Speaking of aviation, a lawyer for victims of the Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 wants Boeing and the US Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, to hand over documents about the decision to keep the Boeing 737 MAX in the air, especially after the deadly Lion Air crash last October. A week after the crash, the FAA warned airlines of the malfunctions in the jet's flight control system, but still allowed these planes to remain flying. British Airways pilots have called off the next strike in their dispute with the carrier, which had been scheduled for the 27th of September. The protest followed failed talks over a pay offer of 11.5% increase in 3 years. The British carrier had already started cancelling flights for the 27th of September in anticipation of that industrial action. And finally, Microsoft has announced a 5-year partnership with Walt Disney Studios. It involves Disney using an innovation lab to shift content production to Microsoft's cloud computing service, the Azure platform, of course. A movie production software company, Avid, is also involved in this partnership, where different workflows are going to be moved entirely to the cloud. That's a run through your company headlines. You're 10 minutes into the hour. We're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. We'll tell you why Ethiopia is describing Egypt's proposal on its dam project as unacceptable. And we'll take a look at how Madagascar plans to boost its tourism sector when we return.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Program. Let's focus on Ethiopia now. It says that Egypt's proposal of filling the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, this enormous $4 billion, 6.5 gigawatt project that it's been working on for a while now, filling it up in 7 years, as far as Ethiopia is concerned, that proposal is unacceptable. Ethiopia's irrigation minister also says that Egypt's ideas are inconsiderate of Ethiopia's development plans and the needs of the nations along the Nile, including those of Sudan. For a really long time now, Egypt has been opposed to the construction of the Renaissance Dam. It says it will reduce its share of the water in the Nile.
The main questions and the new proposal Egypt has come up with is in relation with the operation of the dam. For example, one of the demands they are making is that the Grand Renaissance Dam to release 40 billion cubic meters of water every year without decreasing the average waterfall. This is simply unacceptable. You know, they should also consider our development plans and interests. They should also respect the interests of other nations like Sudan. So, these kinds of obligations are issues of operations, and we cannot agree with.
Speaking of Egypt, according to the United Nations, several cities around the world could pretty much sink into the sea. And that's being attributed to global warming and rising, of course, water levels as well, all of which could combine to cause some major humanitarian crises. One of the cities at risk is Alexandria. It's essentially in the north of Egypt, right on the Mediterranean. CGTN's Yasser Hakim filed this report.
Alexandria overlooks the Mediterranean Sea. For centuries, its vast coastlines have made it a destination for trade and tourism. Those beautiful beaches are in threat of going undersea because of global warming. Experts say if no action is taken, parts of Alexandria could disappear by 2050. The higher temperatures would eat out the coastline.
The defrosting of ice in the North Pole because of the higher temperatures leads to a rise in water levels, which is dangerous on cities that are lower than sea levels. The water levels at the Mediterranean, for example, have risen by 11 centimeters in the last 100 years. The main cause is the human abuse of energy since the Industrial Revolution. This led to global warming with its environmental hazards.
This has been a worrying aspect for its residents.
The Delta and Alexandria, they say, will sink in a few years. We should all play a part in avoiding this by being environmentally aware. We should use clean energy, and factories should install filters.
We should begin with ourselves. We teach environment in the new school curriculum, and preserving environment for the next generations will prevent us from moving people out of Alexandria.
The government has already moved to avoid such a daunting situation.
The state is working hard at building construction that blocks the water level increase, and the proof is that Alexandria has not felt the effects and its beaches have been untouched in spite of the rising sea level.
What matters more is that the international community should move collectively to stop global warming and its effects before it's too late. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Alexandria, Egypt.
Now, there are forecasts that the price of fuels, diesel, for example, could rise significantly next year once United Nations rules on cleaning up international shipping take effect on the 1st of January. In countries like Nigeria, where most businesses depend on diesel-run generators, those costs are expected to be passed right on to you, the consumer. CGTN's Alexandria Marshall takes up that story.
Nigeria's commercial capital, Lagos, is plunged into darkness several times a day. Then its generators roar and the lights flood back on. The country is one of the world's largest economies, where businesses rely heavily on diesel-powered generators. More than 70% of its firms own or share the units. Government data shows generators provide at least 14 gigawatts of power annually, dwarfing the 4 gigawatts supplied on average by the country's electricity grid. Now, diesel costs could spike globally, and many businesses are not prepared.
If the price of diesel goes up, it becomes more difficult for us to operate because consumers, considering the characteristic of the market in which we operate, are not ready to bear the price. And so it becomes more difficult, for us to think about expansion. First is survival, so we will survive the situation if the price of diesel goes up. This is a question I cannot really answer.
Diesel prices are expected to surge as the United Nations rules at cleaning up international shipping come into effect next year. Many ships are expected to burn distillates instead of dirtier fuel oil. While estimates vary widely, experts warn that prices could surge by nearly 20%.
The price increases may be sharper than most people expect, especially because diesel is not is deregulated in Nigeria already, so there's no subsidy on diesel. And as we've seen over time, the price of diesel has moved along with the international market. So if new rules cause the price to rise in the international market, we expect that will cascade into Nigeria as well.
Nigeria's population is growing at 2.6% each year, yet 40% of the population do not have power. West Africa's biggest economy has partnered with German engineering group Siemens to triple the country's reliable power supply to 11,000 megawatts by 2023. However, such plans have previously failed.
Many businesses may go under, businesses may struggle to survive, or in the best case scenario would at least downsize and shut down some production capacity. Because if you can't pay for the diesel for production, you can't pass the price in for increased costs in diesel. The next logical thing to do is to shut down some of that production capacity and produce at the quantity that the demand can carry the price you are willing to sell at.
While many Nigerian households and small business generators are powered by price-capped gasoline, the big generators for larger farms, apartment complexes, and more substantial homes can only run on diesel. Alexandria Marshall for CGTN.
On to agriculture now. The second All-Africa Post-Harvest Congress and Exhibition event is taking place in Addis Ababa. China sent a delegation to that four-day event. It's also sharing its experiences in dealing with food security issues at a massive scale. CGTN's Brian Toussaint reports.
Every 2 years, the AU Commission holds the All-Africa Post-Harvest Congress and Exhibition. The purpose of the meeting is to implement 2014's Malabo Declaration, which called for reduced postnatal food losses in Africa by 50% by the year 2025. This year's theme is post-harvest loss reduction and agro-processing, the drivers of agricultural transformation in Africa.
We Chinese always say people regard food as their prime want. China attaches great importance to food security and has many excellent success experiences. This time we are working with the African Union to understand the current situation, make our best, and work together to solve the problem of post-harvest loss.
The Chinese delegation shared their experiences in guaranteeing food security for their people. In the past 40 years, China has made great achievements in poverty reduction and social development and has successfully helped hundreds of millions of people out of hunger.
China is also participating very actively in this Congress. They are also bringing their technologies to share with us. They are also going to be participating in most of our panel discussions as well to share with us most of the new technologies that China has also put in place. So we are really looking forward to a very strong engagement.
Experts say that Africa is the most food insecure continent on the planet, with about 25% of its people suffering from malnutrition. In sub-Saharan Africa alone, the total quantitative food loss has been estimated to be over 100 million metric tons per year. The lost grain alone could meet the annual food requirements of about 48 million people. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Madagascar has launched the first edition of a tourism and transport forum called WAVE. It's part of a broader effort to boost its appeal as a destination for investment, tourism and travel. Though the country is one of the world's poorest nations, its economy is growing at a relatively decent clip. GDP growth is estimated at over 5% this year. President Andry Rajoelina, who assumed office in early 2019, says the country plans to host at least 500,000 foreign tourists in 5 years by investing in better transportation and infrastructure.
Madagascar va reprendre sa place.
Madagascar needs to reclaim its place. I have always said Madagascar needs to be the window of development in the Indian Ocean. And why not in Africa? Ladies and gentlemen, Madagascar needs to catch up from the developmental delay accumulated over the last decades. To do this, we have launched Vision Madagascar, which aims to develop the country with durable and inclusive growth.
En matière de développement.
Let's go into Zimbabwe for a moment, specifically its healthcare sector. Striking junior doctors have been barred from delivering a petition to Parliament. They're demanding the return of the president of a National Hospital Doctors Association who was allegedly abducted on Saturday. CGTN's Farai Makutuya has been following the developments on this story.
It's been 4 days since Dr. Peter Magombe went missing. His colleagues believe his disappearance is linked to their ongoing strike over pay, which began on the 3rd of September. They held night vigils on Monday and Tuesday, and on Wednesday planned to deliver a petition to Parliament demanding the union leaders' release, but were blocked by police, which says it hadn't cleared the march.
It's quite emotional, and I think it's really unfair on our patients as well as unfair on us who are supposed to be attending to our patients at this particular moment. So we are just trying to make it to address the relevant authorities in this country to just try and make efforts to make sure this situation is addressed, and Dr. Peter Magombe is released in safe health.
Doctors have been joined by nurses and senior consultants in downing their tools until Dr. Magombe is found. Police is treating this as a missing person case and not an abduction. It does say, however, it is urgently investigating the disappearance. But until it gets to the bottom of the matter, those who need medical attention won't be able to get it because the doctors meant to be working in the wards treating them are all out here protesting. They say it's better here than endangering their patients.
You should be properly remunerated such that you attend in a better state, because an unsatisfied doctor is a hazard to the patient. So that's what we are trying to make the authorities to kind of address this matter in a way that it is sustainable.
Junior doctors and government have clashed several times over wages, allowances and unsafe working conditions at under-equipped public hospitals. Farai Makutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
In South Africa, the second batch of Nigerian nationals who are fleeing bouts of xenophobic violence has left OR Tambo International Airport. Last week, 189 people successfully boarded the Mercy flight. It's being run by Air Peace, following a string of violent attacks in parts of Pretoria and Johannesburg. Now, it's understood that the latest group of more than 300 people has been cleared by immigration officials. CGTN's Angelo Coppola has the latest.
Second set of passengers has left OR Tambo International Airport, and that's on Wednesday morning. We understand it's a lot fuller flight than it was last week, when a lot of people were turned away because their papers weren't in order, and immigration officials here at OR Tambo said that they couldn't actually board the flight, so they had to go back and get those papers sorted out. We understand that there are some concerns around some of the kids that have been here for over 24 hours waiting for this flight to happen. What we do know, for instance, is that there have been no other reported incidents of inner xenophobia in the Johannesburg area, so it seems like that's scaled down considerably. That's after the envoys have been doing their round trip around Africa. They're in the second country at the moment, so we don't know for sure whether there's going to be a third flight to accommodate any more of those Nigerian nationals who are hoping to go back to their home country. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN at OR Tambo International Airport in Johannesburg.
We're fast approaching 18:30 GMT. Time for a break. Here's what's coming up next. The US president orders more sanctions on Iran, while Saudi Arabia shows proof of the attack on its oil facilities. And the United Arab Emirates has finally completed its steel dome ahead of the Expo 2020.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
For a look at some economic data out of the country, the country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed.
And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Business Africa. These are the stories making headlines at this hour. At least 26 students and 2 teachers have been killed in a fire that broke out in a Muslim school on the outskirts of Monrovia in Liberia. The victims are aged between 10 and 20. They suffered various degree burns. The cause of the blaze, however, is still unknown. Scientists in Burkina Faso have reached a milestone in the fight against malaria. They've released 5,000 genetically sterilized mosquitoes designed to spread infertility throughout the mosquito population in the wild. This has also reignited debate, however, about bioethics. And in Zimbabwe, striking junior doctors have been barred from delivering a petition to Parliament. They're demanding the return of the president of the National Hospital Doctors Association, who was allegedly abducted on Saturday. That's a run through your headlines. Let's turn to Moscow now. The Chinese Premier Li Keqiang has met the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Premier Li was on a 3-day official visit to the country. He held talks with a range of officials, including the Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev in St. Petersburg. Speaking at a joint press briefing with the Prime Minister, Li said that China and Russia should continue to open their markets and work together to achieve mutual benefit. The Premier also praised the breakthrough seen in cooperation in a range of various fronts between the two countries, in areas like science and technology in particular. Medvedev expressed hope that Russia would work with China to increase the volume of bilateral trade. Now, still on China and Russia, both countries have signed a series of agreements aimed at increasing the ties in the science and tech spheres. CGTN's Sun Tianyuan reports.
China and Russia are looking to tap into scientific and technological innovation from land and from space. The two nations plan to develop a cross-border transport corridor for unmanned vehicles as part of their blueprint to build the Silk Road on ice. To provide better navigation services, China's Beidou satellite system and Russia's GLONASS will strengthen compatibility and interoperability. Another highlight in the joint communique of agreements is space cooperation. The two are set to expand collaboration on lunar and deep space exploration, as well as remote sensing technology development. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang called on the two sides to harness their potential in order to cooperate in basic and applied research, especially in the application of sci-tech achievements. His Russian counterpart, Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, says his country stands ready to expand collaboration in the new fields such as AI and robotics, while developing cooperation in traditional sectors. 2020 and 2021 are the years of scientific and technological innovation for China and Russia. Experts say the two may accomplish more pragmatic results through close collaboration in the future. Sun Tianyuan, CGTN, Beijing.
China is now the world's manufacturer of video surveillance equipment. In fact, it produces more than half of the market's video camera products. One of those manufacturers, Dahua, is setting up businesses throughout the world. CGTN's Xu Xiaochong takes a look now at how they're faring in the South American market.
Seeing in Santiago may be safer than ever before. That's because evil behavior will be spotted by these cameras. Surveillance products by Chinese company Dahua are now being used by local mining industries, police, government, and even the Air Force. Local officials in a suburb of Santiago say this equipment is widely used in maintaining local security management.
The illegal actions in the streets have dropped by 97% since the cameras and surveillance system were put into operation.
Compared to similar products from developed Western countries, Chinese-made products are usually cheaper and just as reliable.
Basically, about 99% of Dahua's products are independently developed and produced by us. We have our own research and development team and even our own factories, which develop and produce our core components.
Localization of management is the key to being accepted in the local market.
We are working together closely with local companies. They have been here for years and have mature experience and ideas. By combining the advantages of our both sides, we can jointly make the market deeper and better.
There is a huge space for the two countries to do a lot more. Fortunately, the business cooperation started to boom in 2018. The effects of the Belt and Road Initiative are being seen from these substantial business projects like port construction and high-tech industries, as well as plantations.
Chile is one of the best economies in Latin America. The so-called narrowest country is providing a wide market for the business sectors from both China and the rest of the world. Xu Daoqun, CGTN, Santiago de Chile.
Now then, the US President Donald Trump has ordered fresh sanctions on Iran. This comes after the weekend attack on Saudi oil facilities, which crippled oil production for some time in the world's biggest crude processing facility. However, Iran has repeatedly denied being involved in any way in this attack. The president's comments on Twitter, no less, came shortly after Saudi Arabia released evidence of how the attack was carried out.
We know the capability for the previous information that we have recovered from previous attack. If the Iranian regime and the IRGC, they are trying to hide any evidence from the component and with the technology, they are mistaken. We do have a lot of evidence against the IRGC, and we will provide it to the United Nations and through the right channel in according to the international law. The cruise missile cannot reach, as we have put the ring, and it's not coming from Yemen. The Houthi militia and the proxy in Yemen, they are just following the order of the IRGC. Those kind of attack is coming from the north with the capability that most likely from the north it can be launched from somewhere, and right now we are working to know exactly the launch point. Whoever launch the UAV or the cruise missile will take the accountability for attacking the Saudi infrastructure and the Saudi civilian.
Right then, got a bit to get through on this particular story. So let's bring in Nathan King, who joins us now from Washington, D.C. with a view from the markets and, of course, the White House. Brent crude, 63.58 at this point in time. Nate, oil prices falling for 2 straight trading sessions now. But what are the lingering concerns among traders?
Yeah, obviously lingering concerns because we saw a 20% hike literally overnight after those attacks, and it settled down around 15%. But as you said, there are a couple of days where it's gone down, albeit from that high. Now, the lingering concerns are essentially this, that it could happen again. A brazen attack, which essentially cut off over 40% of Saudi Arabia's oil output overnight. Now, it's going to come back online, we understand, within 2 weeks up to full capacity again. But there is no reason to suggest that this could not happen again. And it was quite amazing that this was such an audacious attack. So there's a real feeling now amongst oil traders and generally in the markets that these disruptions could come from nowhere and happen pretty quickly. I think what's settled the markets is the fact that the US president has said, look, if it comes to it, we'll release oil from our strategic petroleum reserve. And then he said, actually, well, I don't think we're going to need to. And other countries also suggested that they could help with supply. Of course, not included in helping with supply is Iran, because the US is trying to get its oil exports down to zero, and countries like Venezuela, which of course are being heavily embargoed by the US at the moment too.
Indeed, we'll get back to why traders are being rattled so hard in a moment. But let's focus on Iran, because sanctions on the country have been pretty tight for a really long period of time. Its currency has fell pretty hard. Its economy is contracting. So when the president says he wants substantially tougher sanctions, realistically, what are his options?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right to say that the sanctions regime is very strong indeed. Not only when the US withdrew from the Iranian nuclear deal, the JCPOA, did they snap back the sanctions, but they increasingly added more, especially when it comes to oil exports, and essentially banned anyone using the dollar system from buying Iranian oil. Now, there were some waivers. There was even talk just a few days ago about extending maybe some of these waivers to countries like China, for example. that are the big importers on Iranian oil. There was even talk about France extending a $15 billion credit line to Iran with a US OK, but that seems to have gone by the wayside in the wake of these attacks. So what options they have left? Well, I mean, they could, for example, put an embargo on Yemen to try and stop weapons and sophisticated weapons that they suspect Iran has been supplying the Houthis that could have been behind this attack. Now, that could lead to all sorts of humanitarian concerns. There was an almost shipping blockade in the last few years, in the first few years of the war. That was lifted because of mass starvation problems in Yemen. But they could also focus more on financial institutions around the Middle East that Iran has been using. We saw sanctions, for example, on Lebanese banks and other people in various other countries, or crack down more on the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. There are still things to be done, but actually they're pretty much topped out when it comes to trying to crack down on something, unless you have severe humanitarian consequences. For example, you don't want to start trying to cut off food and medicine, which is already struggling to get through to Iran.
Indeed. So the US government, the Saudi monarchy, they both say that Iran was involved in this attack. The briefing from the Saudi Arabian Defense Ministry, in fact, pointed out that they had, as far as they were concerned, 18 UAVs, 7 cruise missiles, which were used for this attack. But leaving that aside for the moment, where's a smoking gun here?
Well, no, we don't. Well, Saudi Arabia, with that sort of show and tell in the last 12 hours or so, have said, look, these are the weapons. They're Iranian made. There's a mixture of cruise missiles and drones, as you said. But what they have said is that they think it's definitely Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, but they haven't said where these objects, these missiles and drones were launched from. And that's very important. Was it in Yemeni territory? Therefore, it's going to be very difficult, for example, to tie it to Tehran. If the Houthi rebels, remember, have already claimed responsibility. Iraq has already been ruled out by US and Iraqi intelligence. The actual short answer is we may not know ever where these weapons were launched from. So it's going to be very, very interesting. And also do remember that the world kind of distrusts a lot of this intelligence that is laid out by Washington and others ever since the Iraq War and the mess of the weapons of mass destruction. So whatever we hear, always remember, take it with a pinch of salt when we're coming to the judgments of intelligence agencies.
Indeed, a pinch of salt, or a truckload of salt, as it were. One last question for you, Nathan. So after the Gulf War, because when Saddam Hussein was busy launching Scud missiles essentially into Saudi oil facilities, Saudi Arabia put in a lot of work into protecting facilities like the one that was attacked as Abqaiq. So I guess the question for a lot of us is, how did this attack go through? What was vulnerable this time round?
Absolutely. Saudi Arabia, as you know, spends a lot on security and arms. In fact, it is the third biggest purchaser last year of arms and security equipment around the world after the US and China. Quite incredible considering its size of a nation. What it hasn't done, though, is secured these facilities from air attack. It's got lots of ground security. The real fear for Saudi Arabia, for example, was an internal attack, potentially by homegrown dissidents, but not necessarily because of the audaciousness of it, that it would come from the air. And they also thought that the US air defenses and air warning systems within the area might give them enough time. But we have seen since the Yemen civil war, which they're involved in, has started, more and more attacks into Saudi Arabian territory from the Houthi rebels. Not all of them nowhere near the sophistication of this, but what is clear is that a lot of these areas are extremely wide open. They are not well covered by air defense equipment or early warning equipment. A lot of it, remember, is desert, and so therefore there seem to be significant gaps. And I think this is the real worry, is that this could happen again. And one of the biggest purchasers of arms, security equipment from the Americas, tens of billions seemingly every year, can't even know one of these attacks is coming, let alone repel it. And nor can its major security ally, the world's biggest military power, the United States.
Indeed, and that really is a concern, isn't it? Imagine something like this happening at Cushing, Oklahoma. We'll be there for the time being. Nathan King in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much. A quick update on the oil prices, 63.54 on Brent, down about 1.6%. Now, a bit of news that's come through in the last hour or so since we've been on air. Federal Reserve policymakers have lowered their main interest rate for the second time this year. The benchmark rate lowered by 0.25% of a point, essentially as expected by the market, to a range of 1.75% to 2%. Now, the Fed attributed the move to implications of global development for the economic outlook, as well as muted inflation pressure. But it also took an interesting step to calm this week's strains in money markets by lowering the interest rate on excess reserves down to 1.8%. You can, of course, expect a lot more coverage of that in the hour to come. Now then, wireless tech cards could soon be a thing of the past in Stockholm. Essentially, we're going to turn you into cyborgs, not Terminator-style cyborgs, but something close to it. The Swedish capital recently held what's being described as a chipping party, where people volunteered to have near-field communication chips implanted in one of their hands. The microchips eliminate the need for car keys, credit cards, even train tickets. Here's CGTN's Tulisha Balala with more.
This is the Gather Innovation Conference. Here, hundreds of Swedish nationals are going under the knife. The procedure uses a syringe-like device to implant a chip under the skin between the index finger and the thumb.
The chip implant as a key fob, which sits under your skin, and what it does is you can use it to access your office or other public buildings like a swimming pool. You can also use it for accessing your gym or really any place where you would use a magnetic touch card.
This volunteer wants to replace his gym and railway cards and not have to worry about data security.
When you exhale, I've decided to implant one of these chips in my hand for exploring the actual opportunities it might bring. Since I learned recently that it's a passive chip, I'm not that worried about that. I should be more worried about the data that my smartphone is leaking on a daily basis. So since this is a passive chip, I'm not that worried about it.
Those who have undergone the procedure say it's relatively painless.
Well, honestly, I barely felt it. It felt like a mosquito, started doing something but never finished. So it wasn't as painful as one might think.
Near-field communication chip can be found in smartphones and smartwatches and are used to connect with other technology wirelessly. The implant chips will enable wearers to operate them as loyalty cards, gain access to buildings, and to pay for public transport. Users can also connect them to their smartphones via an app.
You can also add data to your chip, put in case of emergency information. You can add your LinkedIn profile or your whatever website links you want to add on there. The most important and valuable dimension is when we'll be able to use implants for health logging purposes. Think of them as a Fitbit under your skin, where you can have a real-time input on all the different functions and data processes that is going on in your body. That for me will be a breakthrough in terms of human health.
The trend of implanting chips has been growing. In 2017, a Wisconsin vending machine company offered its employees a chance to have a chip implanted in their hands, which could be used to buy snacks, log in computers, or to use the copy machine. Tuli Shabalala, CGTN.
Now, months of planning have successfully led to the final piece of the Al Wasl Dome being lifted and set into place at the Expo 2020 site in Dubai. After an intricate, long and detailed construction process, the building is now set to provide a rather unique experience for visitors. CGTN's Daniela Pearson gives us the details on this architectural achievement on What's Hot tonight.
The final piece of the Al Wasl Dome has been lifted into place, representing a significant milestone in the construction of the centerpiece of the Expo 2020 Dubai site. The event is scheduled to start in October 2020 and will last until April 2021. Al Wasl Plaza is the heart of the Expo site, and the building's completion is a key milestone in the event's delivery. It was completed using a technique called strand jacking. With the combined structures and equipment required to lift the dome during this process, the total weight is estimated at 830 tons.
The entire Expo project contains about 33 projects within the bigger project. As far as the infrastructure, we are 100% complete. The thematic districts we completed earlier this year, about 87 buildings, and we obtained all the necessary completion certificates. The theme pavilions are almost there, and also the conference and exhibition center and the global village is almost completed. So we are going to be ready ahead of time.
Al Wasl Dome will be the largest 360-degree projection surface in the world, providing an unparalleled experience for millions of visitors. This new architectural marvel joins a long list of inspiring designs that Dubai has created in efforts to revive its real estate market and economy.
So the legacy plans are basically maintaining 80% of our investments during the Expo period for the post-Expo period in a city known as District 2020. So this will be continuing as a place where people can continue visiting from all over the world. It will be an integrated mixed community where we'll have a mixture of cultural offerings, programming spaces, where we'll have events, and also businesses that will be continuing to work out from District 2020.
In 2018, the economy experienced a 1.94% growth, the slowest since the 2009 financial crisis that caused a downturn in the real estate market. Dubai aims to create a new district for businesses and innovation in a bid to maintain the majority of the extravagant Expo site after the event. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Right, then on through commodity prices here for you. Continuing that conversation on oil for a bit here for you. 64 seems to be essentially the level where Brent has sort of settled, especially after the weekend's attacks. 17 or 18 drones, according to the Saudi Defense Ministry, and about 8 or so cruise missiles slamming into that facility, and of course a related oil field nearby. The processing plant at Abqaiq now apparently able to handle at least 2 million barrels of crude a day, according to Saudi Aramco. They say they should essentially be able to ramp back up to pre-attack processing levels in 2 weeks, according to the CEO, Amin Nasser. Brent futures just kept falling, but have they essentially bottomed out at this level? We'll find out. We'll be back in 60 seconds with more content.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Chili is widely consumed in China. It's an enormous part of Chinese cuisine. So much so that now Rwanda is eyeing China as a lucrative market for exporting chili peppers. CGTN's Terry Wangari with that story on Grassroots tonight.
Marcel is a farmer from the eastern province of Rwanda. 2 years ago, he had to reduce his production of chili due to the low demand of the market and shifted to other traditional crops like maize, cassava, beans and sorghum. For Marcel, whose only income source is farming, this change from chili to less profitable crops was very frustrating, yet he was left with no choice. Recently, however, some visitors from China have restored his faith on chili farming.
Recently, Alibaba came to visit us and they left us fresh hope that we are going to sell our fresh habanero. They also refreshed our minds that we are going to have a big deal with Alibaba to market our product.
Last year, Alibaba launched the Electronic World Trade Platform, otherwise known as EWTP, in Rwanda. The platform is aimed at incubating e-trade rules and fostering a more effective policy and business environment for cross-border electronic trade development. It has helped chili farmers in Rwanda establish the right quality and taste of the chili peppers, while giving farmers profit for their produce and creating employment.
The cooperation with Alibaba is going to increase the volume which we are producing. As I said, the maximum we can export currently is about 4 tons. And for our conversation with Alibaba, they said they're looking for 10,000 metric ton a year. So it's a very big volume, which is going to not even affect or impact us only as the Gashora farm. It's going to also to impact the whole Rwandan society, especially farmers.
Our first target is to make sure that farmers are following good agricultural practices to meet those international requirements. On a weekly basis, we have our team. Made up of 15 agronomists. All of them are trained in good agricultural practices. They have to be closer, next to the farmers, to make sure that farmers are following good agricultural practices.
Selling Rwanda chili sauce to China is only the first step. Regarding the future, China and Rwanda have more cooperation directions worth exploring. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
Right, then a quick run through the currencies as we wrap up the program for you. So Nigeria Central Bank, rather curiously, has moved its MPC meeting forward. Supposed to be next week, they're going to hold it this week instead, starting tomorrow as a matter of fact. No reason was given for this shift in dates, but inflation in the oil producer did fall to a 4-year low last month, 11.02%, but it's still not in single digits yet. It's been in triple digits, in fact, for the last 3 years. Very stubborn at those levels. The CBN, though, did give us its first rate cut since 2015 back in March, but are we likely to see another? We'll find out and update you this week, Friday. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on what you've seen here for the last hour or so. Several ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramanyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today's up next from Washington, D.C.